The number one question I get on tours is, how long do you age your bourbon? And I can hear it in my sleep. How long do you age your bourbon? How long do you age your bourbon? And my smart ass answer is, until we need a mortgage payment. But the truth is, we're aging it till it's mature. And that's not a fixed date. In the US, bourbon whiskey is aged in a new charred oak container. And nobody's ever come up with a better container than a barrel. Barrels were invented by the Celts in around 640 BC. They were perfected by the Romans, and they were really the first shipping container. And they continued through up until the point where we started getting forklift pallets in around the 1930s. So really, it wasn't until after the Great Depression that people stopped using barrels for everything. You would get flour and sugar and nails and all kinds of things would be shipped in barrels because you could roll them around and stand them up and put them in a ship. But now oak barrels are used almost exclusively for aging spirits. There's a distinction that needs to be made between age and maturity. And any woman can tell you they're not the same thing. So age is one factor, but the barrel itself, how porous it is, the life that that tree had over a century as it grew, what side of the mountain it was on, how much water it got, how much sun, what the relative temperature was to areas maybe further down the mountain. All those factors play into how long it takes a barrel to mature. And so we don't age to a date. We age until it's mature, and we don't release a barrel based on how old it is. Every single barrel is tasted, tested, and we're gonna determine when it's at its optimum flavor. The spirit, once it comes off the still, is generally around 150 proof or 75% alcohol. That's usually where we're averaging. That spirit needs to be proofed down to 125 proof or less in order to legally become bourbon whiskey when it's put into that new charred oak barrel. And the way we do that is we add water to it. We will weigh the spirit. We will take a proof on it with a piece of lab equipment. And then there's an app. You can actually get it on the App Store. It's called Hoochware. And it will tell you exactly how many pounds of water to add to that spirit in order to make a mixture or a blend of the exact proof that you're seeking. And so we'll proof it down. We use the same water out of the aquifer we use for everything else here. And then we'll take that proof down spirit and put it into 53-gallon new charred oak barrel.
So there's a couple other little knobs we get a twist on barrels. First is the wood, where we select this white oak from. So different regions of the country really can affect the flavor in different ways. So we have oak from, we like to call it a swamp oak. And we had brought some of this in from the Ozark region, we're talking like southern Mississippi, Louisiana. And it very much has like this darker color, leather, tobacco, a lot more spice. Our North Carolina oak we get is very much vanilla, fruit forward, a lot of caramel comes out in it. We get some from the mountains of like Virginia, West Virginia, very like mineral quality. So we very are much capturing that terroir of that tree growing 100, 200 years. And then there's also subspecies of white oak as well that can be used. So the one we're sourcing in North Carolina is a chestnut white oak. Most of that white oak has actually been cut in North Carolina, and it actually makes its way to Spain for wine barrels. A lot of that actually gets sold at a premium, at a higher price for wine. So as far as an oak profile here in the US, we're very unique in that there's not a lot of distilleries even getting that Western North Carolina chestnut white oak.
Almost all of it goes to Spain.
It all goes to Spain for really high end.
And southern France. Yeah. For cognac aging as well.
And so we've got a really high-end wood with a different profile that's always brought more of a premium price. But Jonathan's done such a great job of actually making really good friends with the family that owns the Stave Mill in Western North Carolina. So they're another small family-owned operation. He saw what we're doing here, and we've got unbelievable relationship. Whereas we're able to actually buy the wood directly from him. He will store it, age it outside after it's been rough sawn for us, given that's that 12 to 18 months of outdoor seasoning.
24 months, 24. We're trying to go 2 years. The thing is, as it sits outside, we're getting those tannins are coming out of the wood. they're oxidizing, they're forming a sort of gray coating on the outside of the wood. They become insoluble, so they won't dissolve in the bourbon and give us that bitter tannic finish during the aging process. So a lot of the bourbons that are selling for real high prices, they're aging them so long that the tannins are concentrating and almost leaves your tongue very dry and sandy feeling.
Yeah.
We're avoiding that by leaching those tannins out. It just takes time out in the weather for that oak. The second thing is, because we have a longer growing season in North Carolina compared to some of the more northern Appalachian oak, we're getting a sweeter barrel because the hemicellulose that's in the wood has more time during the growing season to form. And hemicellulose is almost like a starch. It's made out of sugars, and it starts to break down both during the seasoning process and during the aging process, and it puts that sugar into the bourbon. So there's about 2.5 pounds of sugar, 3 pounds of sugar that's coming out of each barrel into the bourbon.
We're then going to toast it. So they're going to toast it at the cooperage for us and caramelize some of that sugar. So it's going to give that like classic caramel, kind of burnt sugar, some of those kind of burnt notes. So that's going to happen with that toasting, just like you would toast bread. And then they're going to go ahead and char it for us and put that, basically light it on fire. So there's 4 different levels of char. So from 1 to 4, with 4 being the highest, it usually means the barrel's been on fire for somewhere around about 30 seconds or so before they put it out. And that's gonna go ahead and crack the wood open, allow the whiskey to get deeper in the wood. It's gonna create that little bitty carbon layer that the whiskey's gonna be forced in and through, kind of scrubbing the whiskey. And then if you ever look at a stave on the side, you'll see there's almost like a line as far as the whiskey goes into the stave. But it's surprising, on the staves are about 3/4 inch thick or so. It's gonna move almost 3/4 through the wood, pulling back all the different chemicals over about 2,000 you smell and taste, giving you about 100% of the color. About 80% of the overall flavor can actually come up from that barrel. So we can put White Dog or unaged whiskey into 2 different barrels, set them side by side, age them their whole lives, and they can taste quite a bit different just because of the different selections of wood, actually how much they leak, which is something we didn't realize, but they actually, 2% of the barrels will leak totally empty in their lifetime as an industry standard. So there's a lot of oxygen leaking, a lot of variable oxygen and leaking from each barrel, and that really can affect the overall flavor quite a bit, barrel to barrel. So we've got the char, and we got levels on char, we got levels on toast we got to play with, where we source the wood, all that great stuff. And then now we got to select the proof. So if we go in at the higher limit, up closer to 125 proof, we're going to get a lot different extraction. It's going to be a lot more spicier for us in our profile. It's going to be a little bit more bitter on the profile, so it's going to be a drier profile. And then just by dropping out a 120 on a fill, it can be sweeter. And then at 115, it almost can be too sweet, and we lose the spice and the balance. So for us, it's always kind of a balance, and it's barrel to barrel. So one at 120 and another barrel at 120 might actually not have the same spice profile. Mm-hmm. So we do have a little bit of variable in there on our fill levels, char levels, and toast levels. So even as a small producer, we are adding some variability in there. So in 4 to 5 years, when we go back, I have more different paints to dip in with that paintbrush when we're blending and creating that final flavor profile.
A lot of distilleries just, they order from a big barrel producer. About 80% of the barrels are made by one company, which is terrifying, to be honest with you. We're working with smaller family-owned cooperages, and we're supplying the oak to them, or at least specifying that we want that 24-month season North Carolina oak, and then they're toasting and charring it to our specification, and we're able to get deep down into exactly what kind of profile we want for each of those barrels. And it's again, it'd be cheaper if we didn't use 24-month seasoned oak. We're paying a premium for that. It'd be cheaper if we didn't toast the barrels first. We could just char them. But getting all of that done makes the absolute best possible barrel. And as Mike said, 80% of your flavor and aroma is coming out of that barrel and out of the interaction with that barrel and the distillate we've worked so hard to make.
Unfortunately, it's that one thing we can control as much as possible, but you can't overall control each barrel. And the next control comes at the blending.
Yeah, and once it's in the barrel, we're not touching it. There's no more touch by human hands. You just leave it.
Exactly.
It's part of the beauty of the process, because it stretches back in time to when some lucky acorn fell in a forest somewhere and became an oak tree, all the way up to 2 years after the wood was quarter sawn, and then it's made into a barrel, and then you're going out through years of aging. And Mike can tell you, he'll go in, he'll sample a 3.5-year-old barrel. It's better than the 4.5-year-old one that's 2 rows over. And that's just the way it is, and that's okay. And you can take that 4.5-year-old one, give it another 6 months, and it'll be a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, we had one of our single barrels we're about to do now. We had just tried it before, like 6 months ago, and it was terrible. I remember it was the Quitter's whiskey, and we had tried it, and it was bitter, it was terrible, and now it's amazing.
And it went through a hot summer, more esterification, oxygen, who knows?
It is kind of nice with our blending that we do have people making them, and they get to put their names on them. And so that allows us to kind of track the barrels. They kind of have a name and so it's fun to kind of sample them and keep up with them. But I'm always trying to, as we're sampling each year with the barrels, we're going out with them, I'm trying to figure out what do we do? Why is this one good, why it's not? So even to this day, we're still trying to learn every time we sample a barrel, every time we blend. We're kind of finding 4 or 5 like general profiles we're kind of getting, Katie and I are kind of trying to develop, but there's probably 15 or 20 general flavors we get out of our wheated bourbon. And then it's just each barrel is some type of combination of those 15 or 20. And so it's kind of fun to kind of learn how that's going. And we're trying to map that to what production process and trying to figure out as much as we can as we scale up so we can smartly scale up. And then eventually be able to have a little bit more of a flavor profile. So if you get bottled in bond, it's going to be sweeter and smoother. If you get this one, it's fruitier and lighter profile. So trying to have as a general guide for us, but at this scale, it's going to be different every time, and we're cool with that. And only with size would we ever get enough consistency to be like it tastes the same every time.
Well, and again, that becomes
that was not fun.
Then we're factory workers. We're not crafters.